Hello everyone and welcome to another Muffin video. Before we dive in here, make sure you hit that subscribe button and notification bell and drop a like on the video too if you're enjoying the content. Don't forget to join our Discord server as well if you're not already there. The link is in the description down below. We've also activated our channel membership which comes with all kinds of perks, so check that out if you're interested in joining. And speaking of channel membership, I do want to take a moment to give a special shout out to our current members. So thanks to all of you, and I hope you're enjoying the benefits. And finally, a reminder that all comments on every video will be automatically entered into our weekly giveaways. Winners will be randomly selected every Monday. So good luck, and let's get this started. Alright, so we're here in the third video of our regional artifact tier list series, which is going through and taking a look at every single artifact in the game and making a region by region tier list. Now we've already made a tier list for the Darkmoon Forest and Aether Volcano, and now we're on the third region, Oasis of Lures. Now a reminder that unlike other systems in the game, there's no ways to reset the decisions you make in artifacts, which is why this type of tier list is so important, because every resource you use, every choice you make is permanent, and knowing and understanding what those best choices are can save you a lot of resources and also greatly optimize your progression as you move through the game. So because of the different stat requirements, we are going to be doing two separate tier lists in the video, one for DPS and one for tanks. I don't include healers here because they do share a lot of the DPS traits, but for healers you'd basically just want to prioritize attack and healing percentage whenever you see them, and then otherwise just follow the DPS route. Oasis of Lures has 11 rares, 10 epics, and 13 legendaries, and as always, this is not always a case automatically of higher rarity equals better. We are of course factoring in bonds as well, but even beyond the bonds, this will also help you choose where to spend your amber, because you can have many artifacts to start up if you have the dupes, but it might not be worth investing the amber in one artifact over another, for example, and that's another way this tier list will help you in prioritizing where to use that amber. Now let's jump in and start going through this region and see what kind of artifacts lie in store for us. So starting off the bat, we're going to start with rares, then transition into epics, and then finally move on to legendaries. And I'm going to go through this relatively quickly, otherwise this will be a very long video. So follow along and you'll understand the reasoning behind the rankings. So first up we have Wayland's Armor. Wayland's Armor gives defense. Forgot to mention, by the way, we are starting with a DPS tier list first, and then we will do the tank tier list second. So we have the Wayland's Armor, which gives defense. Defense, not such a hot stat for DPS, so we're going to go ahead and put this into D tier because this is relatively low priority for you. Next up we have the Book of Judgment. The Book of Judgment gives attack. Very good stat for DPS. Not the best compared to, for example, Determination, Haste, Mastery, Crit, etc. But a very good stat nonetheless, and directly increases your DPS. As such, this rare is going to make it all the way to the B tier. Then after that we have the Dim Crown, which increases your evasion. Now evasion is slightly better than defense and HP for DPS because of the fact that it allows you to straight up avoid the damage entirely of one attack, if that actually works, if you get the evade on an attack. So I'll put this in C tier since it is slightly better than the other defensive stats for DPS. Next we have the Song of the Pale Foam. This gives block, ultimately not very useful for DPS, so we're going to go ahead and put that into D tier. Then we have the Omniscient Sword. Omniscient Sword gives HP. Like defense, Omniscient Sword is not going to give a stat worth much for DPS, so HP puts it in the D tier. Then we have the Song of Storms. Endurance I rank around the same as Evasion for DPS. This is a percentage-based reduction in the damage you take, so this is going to go ahead and go into C tier just above defense and HP in D tier. So C tier for Evasion and Endurance. Then we have the Witness Chandelier. Determination. This increases your determination, which is a phenomenal stat for DPS, and because of that, this is actually going to make it all the way to the A tier, because you need to get as much determination, haste, and crit as you can to try to reach your flat stat caps. Getting a source of this from Artifact is really beneficial. Then we have Smile of a Hound Fox. As we've just established, haste is going to go right alongside determination as one of those very good DPS stats, and this is going to make its way all the way to the A tier as well. Then we have Exquisite Aged Cheese, which, look at this, gives mastery. We have 3 in a row, 3 rares making their way to the A tier. Determination, haste, and mastery, all very important stats. Then Celebration Music, wow, we're on a roll here. Another one, crit. So these 4 stats, I don't think it's a mistake that they're all here. These are all going to A tier as they are very important for DPS. And finally, for the rares, we have the Buoyancy Necklace, which is going to give you Tenacity. Tenacity for DPS is going to go straight into the D tier alongside Defense and HP. So that is all our rares. And now let's move on to the epics and see what lies in store for us here. So, starting off with the epics, we have the Gallarhorn Melody. Let's take a look here. So the Gallarhorn Melody gives Determination, which is a very good stat as we've established, but because this is an epic and it gives quite a lot more, this is actually going to make its way all the way to the S tier because it is quite a good source of determination and worth prioritizing as DPS, plus of the fact that it also is an epic, which means it activates a bond. So moving on, we have the Plain Travel Guide, which gives HP. Now, HP in Rare would have ended up in the D tier, as this also fulfills a bond requirement. This is going to get bumped up for DPS into the C tier. Then we have the Flying Crossbow, which gives Endurance. Endurance we know was in the C tier. It's going to stay in the C tier. Doesn't matter whether you get 80 of it or 200 of it. It's not going to bump its priority up with regards to DPS. Then we have the Sword of Halvar, which gives Tenacity. This was previously a D tier stat, but we're going to put it in C tier because of the bond aspect. Laziness of the Frostmane gives Defense. Not very good for DPS, but it satisfies a bond. It ends up in C tier. Portal of Beyond is next. This gives HP. We've established that that would normally be in D tier, but because of the bond, it goes into C tier. You should see a trend here by now. Same with Floating Island Device, which gives Defense. This is going to promptly end up into the... Wait, I already put it there. Oh, I must have... Oh, I see. One of these got moved. Okay, that's my mistake. I got confused. Anyway, it doesn't matter. They're both in C tier. Forgive that little error. So, Floating Island Device. So, Portal Beyond HP goes into C tier. Floating Island Device Defense goes into C tier. So, that was a little mix-up there, but they're both in the C tier. Then next up we have the Traces of the Lightmane, which gives a large amount of attack. Now this definitely bumps this up from B tier up into A tier for DPS. So that's going to go right to the top of A tier. That is a lot of attack. Then we have the Wonderland Train Ticket, which also gives attack. This is going to be another A tier here. Very a good amount of attack from these 2 artifacts, so they're definitely worth prioritizing. And finally, we have another Mastery artifact. This time it is an epic, so you have the bond aspect, plus it's a phenomenal stat Mastery alongside haste, crit, and determination. So this is going to end up in the S tier for DPS. Now, we finally get on to our legendaries, and there are 13 of them, so let's go through them one by one once again and see how these legendaries are going to stack up next to the rest for DPS. So right off the bat, we have a source of almost 500 crit. That is a huge amount of crit. This is an absolute super artifact for DPS. This is going to go way up into the S tier. Easy S tier. Next up, we have the Club Ticket. The Club Ticket increases HP. Because we've established HP is not such a huge priority for DPS, even if it's legendary, this is still going to end up in the C tier, because it's really just a bond for us as opposed to a source of DPS. Then we have the Moving Temple. The Moving Temple, look at this. This is a sick artifact. This increases your core skill damage and your core skill healing effect. Now, it doesn't matter whether your class is focused on core or not, this is a phenomenal artifact because one of your class changes at some point will benefit from stacking core damage. The same with passive, the same with tactical. So this is probably, alongside the passives and tactical versions of this, one of the top tier artifacts in the entire game. So because of this, this is going to make its way right to the top of S tier. Phenomenal artifact. Next up is Pendulum of Thought. This gives block, which is not such a high priority for DPS. As a result, this is going to go into C tier because it activates a bond for us. Next, we have the Matrix Maze, which gives endurance. Like the others, this is making its way to C tier. Then we have the Tears of Metal, which, look at this. This is a huge source of determination. I think we should know by now where this is going to end up, and that's right, it'll be to the S tier. Then after this we have Unusual Statue, which is a large defense increase. For DPS, again, not that critical. It is a bond activator for us, so this is another one in the C tier. As you can see here, C tier is getting quite full of artifacts, but that's okay. Then we have the Serpent's Lullaby, which gives a huge amount of attack, and as a result, this is going to definitely go above B tier, definitely go above A tier. This is going to make its way solidly into the S tier. Very good amount of attack from this artifact. Then we have the Dream Hourglass, which gives a huge amount of mastery. Another phenomenal artifact for DPS output. Mastery is a very important stat, so this goes all the way to S tier. Absolutely great artifact. Then we have Insight of Dust, which increases tenacity, and you guessed it, this is going to be another C tier here for DPS. Then we have Map of the Ancient Continent, which, look at this, this is the other core skill damage and core skill healing effect artifact. This time it's percentage based as opposed to the flat stats one, which the Moving Temple was. This is another phenomenal one. You can see I've even taken this to plus 10. That's how much I like this one. And this is going to go right to the top of S tier as one of the best artifacts in the entire game, let alone in this region. Then we have Boat on the Quiet Stream, which gives a very large amount of evasion, but once again, these defensive stats are just bond activators for our DPS, so they end up in the C tier as well. And finally, the Tiny Crescent gives a large amount of haste, which is yet another S tier. So we're going to go ahead and plonk that right up in the S tier here. And that is it. That is all of the legendary rares and epics for DPS. So take a snapshot of this. This is going to be your priority for DPS for this Oasis of Lures artifact region. So what you're looking at now is the best in slot for DPS. And now with that said, we're going to go ahead and do this all over again, this time for tanks. So bear with me, I'm going to transition across. Okay, and here we go, round 2 of this tier list. This time we're going to be looking at it from a tank's perspective, and like with the past videos, I am going to breeze through this relatively quickly, so pay attention as we go through the ranking for these artifacts from the perspective of a defensive-oriented tank. Now, first off, we have the Wayland's Armor, which gives defense. This is much better for tanks than it is for DPS. Obviously, defense is one of the primary defensive stats that we want to chase as a tank, so this is going to go ahead and make its way all the way to the A tier despite being a rare. Next up, Book of Judgment gives attack. This is pretty low priority for a tank, so as a result, this is going to end up in the D tier. Next, we have the Dim Crown, which gives evasion. Evasion I rank slightly lower than defense and block, for example, for a tank. So as a result, this is going to end up in the B tier. Then we have the Song of Pale Foam, which gives block, one of the phenomenal stats for tanks, which you need quite a lot of. I believe 55% is the target stat percentage for block that you're aiming for, so you can't get enough of it. As a result, this is going to go alongside defense in the A tier. Then we have the Omniscient Sword, which gives HP. HP I'm going to put alongside the stats like Tenacity, Evasion, and so on, and that's going to go to the B tier. Then we have Song of Storms, which is Endurance. I've said in my previous videos that I find Endurance to be an underrated stat for tanks, and so I'm going to go ahead and put this in the A tier alongside Defense and Block, as that's where I believe it belongs because of its viability in reducing the damage you take. Next we have the Witness Chandelier, which increases Determination. Now this is going to be a C tier for tanks, not quite a D tier. It's a bit better than flat attack, but again it's pretty low priority because it doesn't improve your tanking capabilities. Next up is Smile of a Hound Fox, and similarly to the Determination one, this is going to go ahead and end up in the C tier because haste is relatively okay for a tank, but not one of your top priorities. Exquisite Aged Cheese gives mastery, and once again this is going to be another C tier because of the fact that it's not quite as bad as attack, but still not a high priority. Celebration Music gives crit, which is going to follow suit alongside in the C tier with the rest of those stats. And finally we have the Buoyancy Necklace, which gives tenacity. Tenacity I'm going to rank alongside evasion and HP as far as its beneficial value for tanking, so this is going to end up in the B tier. And that is all of our rares, and now we move on to our epics for tanks. So starting off we have Gjallarhorn's Melody, which gives determination. This is going to stay in C tier for tanks because of the fact that the additional value from those stats doesn't really improve its position in the tier list, but it does activate a bond for us, which can improve tanking capabilities. Then we have the Plane Travel Guide, which increases HP. This is a little bit better than the B tier HP ones since it gives a larger amount, so this is going to end up at the bottom of A tier. Flying Crossbow gives a larger amount of endurance. I've already established how important endurance is for tanking, so because of that I'm actually going to go ahead and put this in the S tier because this is an important source of endurance for you as a tank. Then we have the Sword of Hvalr, which gives tenacity, and again this gives a much larger amount than the rares. As such, it would bump it up into A tier. Then we have the Laziness of the Frostmane, which gives a very large amount of defense. Defense, one of the best stats for tanking, so this is going to make its way to S tier as it is a super good source of defense. Then we have Portal of the Beyond, which also gives a large amount of HP, and following the other HP one, this is going to end up in the A tier. Then we have the Traces of the Lightmane, which increases attack. This is going to end up in the C tier because it activates a bond. Wonderland Train Ticket also increases attack, and this also ends up in the C tier because it activates a bond. And finally, the Giant Sword in the Field is going to be another contender for C tier because of the fact, you guessed it, that it activates a bond. There is a trend here. And finally, we are going to take a look at the legendaries here, starting with the Flawless Poem. Flawless Poem gives a large amount of crit. As a result, this is going to end up in the C tier. Now I realize here my portal did not go in the right place, but don't worry, this was an HP artifact. Let me correct this quickly. Portal of Beyond gives HP. This is going to end up in the A tier. Apologize for making that mistake twice. So back to the legendaries, we are going to go look at the Club Ticket next, which gives a large amount of HP. As a result, this is going to end up in the S tier. As it is a legendary, it gives a larger amount of HP. Very nice for tanking, bit better than the A tier and B tier HP ones. Next, we have the Moving Temple, which increases your core skill damage. This is great for DPS, not so important for tanks, so this is going to end up in the C tier. Then we have the Pendulum of Thought, which increases block by a absolutely massive amount. This is the best, practically the best artifact in this region for tanks from this massive block increase. This is going right to the top of S tier without any hesitation. Then we have the Matrix Maze. The Matrix Maze increases a very large amount of endurance. This is another contender right to the top of S tier, as this is a great source of endurance. Then we have the Tears of Metal, which gives determination, and this is going to go right into the C tier as it activates a bond. Then we have Unusual Statue, which is another very large source of defense. As a result, this is going to make it also to the S tier as a very, very good artifact for tanks. Then we have the Serpent's Lullaby, which gives a large amount of attack. This is going to stay in the C tier with the rest of these artifacts. Then we have Dream Hourglass, which gives mastery. You guessed it, it's another C tier for tanks. Then we have Inside of Dust, which gives a large amount of tenacity. This is going to make its way to A tier for tanks, not quite to S tier, but we are going to put this at the top of A tier. Then the last three artifacts, we have the Map of the Ancient Continent, which increases core skill damage and healing. Again, not that critical for tanks, so we're going to put this right in the C tier. Then we have Boat on a Quiet Stream, which gives a very large amount of evasion. This is going to make its way to the top of A tier alongside the Tenacity one. And finally, we have the Tiny Crescent, which gives haste, and this is going to make its way into the C tier at the top of C tier. And that is the entire tank tier list as you see it. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen, the complete tier list for the Oasis of Lures region, both for DPS and for tanks. I hope this helps you prioritize how you're going to spend your Resonance Stones and also your Amber more specifically, which is a rather limited resource. And good luck. I hope you get good artifact RNG, and I will see you in the next video. Bye now.